Hello again, fellow podcaster, and welcome back to Pod Theory. I'm your host, Jason Cercone, and today we're going to talk about how to repurpose other recorded content for your podcast. One of the big things I love about podcasts, and I know I've talked about this in the past, is the amount of miles you can get out of the content in other capacities. Your scripts and your bullet points can be transformed into social media posts, blog posts, emails. You can make video clips to use all over the internet. Your audio can be cut into smaller clips for promoting your show. The research you put into building your show and the content that came from all of that research can be utilized to make webinars and trainings and other items that can add to your content catalog. Without question, podcasting provides you with multiple ways to work smarter, not harder, with every episode you produce. But what about the other way around? Does your webinar content translate to podcast content? Do the recordings of your live trainings make for quality podcast material? Does the audio from videos you created for YouTube or Facebook Live or Instagram Live work when you turn it into a podcast? Depending on who you ask these questions to, the answers you'd receive are most likely yes across the board. But today, I'm looking at this through a different lens, and I want you to do the same. If you're going to use the audio portion of a video recording or a webinar or a live training or a speech or a presentation or anything else that you've produced, please make sure it sounds good. I can't tell you the number of podcasts I've come across, and these are great podcasts from very successful people who take a shortcut and use audio from something else, and then they throw in an intro on the front of it, an outro on the back, and they call it a podcast episode. Now, can this work? Sure, if the audio quality is consistent with your normal podcast releases. But if you're producing high-level shows every time you publish new podcast content, then add in something that's grainy, that isn't mic'd properly, that wasn't meant to be part of a podcast, and it's difficult to understand, just for the sake of getting a free podcast episode out there, you're being lazy. Period. I'm once again going to call consistency to the front of the classroom. You don't want to interrupt a good flow of content with something that could potentially damage the user experience. Is the content good? Probably, but it's good for its platform. Instead of taking whatever you have and putting it in podcast form, record a short podcast that touches on some of the high points of that content, then direct your listeners to where they can find the actual full piece of content. If the audio is better consumed via the original video you shot, direct your listener on how to get to the video. If you created a webinar, get your listeners over to that webinar with a synopsis of what they'll learn when they find it. Believe me, you're going to get much more traction for your efforts if you don't try to just fill podcast space with something that isn't up to your regular quality standards. Listen, I'm all for repurposing. We all have a lot on our plate, and as content creators, we want to get the most out of every piece of content we put time into building. But you never want to take shortcuts that could compromise your consistency, your standards, or your reputation. Content is meant to be consumed and enjoyed in the right environment. If you have audio that fits your standards and you want to use it on your podcast, go for it. But be sure to let your listeners know that what they're about to hear was originally recorded for another purpose. And if the quality of that piece of audio is not up to snuff, don't take the shortcut. Record a shorter episode and point people where they can have the best experience with that piece of content. And that will bring this episode of Pod Theory to its conclusion. If you'd like to give me some feedback on today's session, Pod Theory as a whole, or anything regarding podcasting, please shoot me a text or give me a call at 412-965-8428. Can't wait to chat podcasting with you soon. Good talk. I'll see you back here tomorrow. This has been Jason Cercone on Pod Theory.